So this weekend I had a chance to see Gladiator 2 and Wicked in honor of the quote-unquote Glicked phenomenon. Listening to a interview that Sean Chandler did where he mentioned the word Glicked, similar to Barbenheimer from over a year ago, I thought, okay, there's no way I can miss out on this one. So first stop, I saw Gladiator 2, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Pedro Pascal, Connie Nielsen from the original film, Paul Mescal as the lead actor, and Denzel Washington amongst other people. 15 years after the events of the original film, where Lucius Aurelius is living a quiet life and then experiences a certain loss at the hands of the Roman army, and goes on a revenge path just like his father Maximus did. As for my history with Gladiator, I've seen the original film. It was a while back though. I was in my early 20s. Came out when I was 10 years old. I was too young to see it for the violent content. My parents never took me to see it in theaters. I wouldn't call myself a big fan of the original film, but I recognize its significance and importance in pop culture, and a lot of people from my generation call it one of their all-time favorites. Again, not a huge fan of it personally, but I did quite like it. With Gladiator 2, though, this was obviously a question of whether or not we needed a sequel, but if there's a good enough justification for it, there's no reason to get all worked up about it. Seeing some of the reviews coming out, it's been a very lukewarm at best, maybe some really positive responses, but overall the reception isn't as strong as it was towards the predecessor. When you go into a movie like Gladiator, you're going to see gladiator fights in a big coliseum, some political corruption and backstabbing going on behind the scenes. This is the ancient Roman Empire. There was bound to be some type of dysfunction going on, and just like with the original, they don't hesitate to show that here, particularly regarding Denzel Washington's character, and with Pedro Pascal trying to figure out a way to subvert things as they're happening throughout the government. While this movie is pretty solid and it does offer a lot of entertainment value to go on, what really could have benefited this movie is if it tacked on an extra 10 to 15 minutes, maybe even 20, because it does kind of montage through certain important parts that you would expect it to really allow us to sit with the characters and allow us to feel what they're feeling, getting us inside the heads of the main character Lucius. Paul Mescal, I would say, does a fine job in the leading role. I am no way comparing him to Russell Crowe because that makes the guy look really bad. And to compare this to its predecessor, that's not really a fair thing to do. But inevitably, if you're a Gladiator fan, that's almost kind of inevitable. And even for someone like me, it's kind of hard not to. The emotions in the original film are a lot more stronger than they are here. Not to say that there's no strong emotional anchor points, particularly with Connie Nielsen's character, who just like in the predecessor, is the heart and soul of the story here. As for Pedro Pascal, who's a high-ranking general in the Roman army, I really like what they do with him here and how he helps to subvert the government. And I also really like how they don't paint him as a clear-cut bad guy, because he does something to Lucius, who loses his wife or lover at the hands of the army that Pedro Pascal's character is leading, causing him to go on a revenge path, but it doesn't exactly go the way you would expect. I kind of figured that it wasn't going to. Without being too specific, I did really like how it ended. And the fact that Pedro Pascal his toe in yet another big franchise, I guess we're going to call it a franchise, the Gladiator franchise. Game of Thrones, Star Wars, The Last of Us, Gladiator, and next year, the Marvel Universe with the Fantastic Four. The guy is stretching himself way too thin. And Denzel Washington, every reviewer on this platform has praised the hell out of him, so I'm not really adding anything new. I've loved the guy in everything that I've seen him in, and he just lights it up every time he's in front of the camera. As I alluded to earlier, Gladiator really has a big spectacle, gladiator fights, and certain things that are thrown in there to heighten the excitement. Whereas in the first film, it was just them fighting each other one-on-one, or maybe a couple of people against each other. They up the ante and throw in some different things that maybe in a practical sense would not have happened. I don't know the history of the Roman Empire all that well, so it may or may not have been true. You could probably ask a historian if any of this did occur. But at one point, the Colosseum is a giant swimming pool, and there's sharks in there. I think that's really just out there, but I've seen crazier stuff in entertainment, so I wasn't that fazed by it. Still, I did have the thought of, I'm not really buying that. But aesthetically, I think this really captures the feeling of the Roman era. The costumes, the production design, the way people talk, It's not Latin or whatever language they spoke back then. They're all speaking English. But the feeling of the era that's portrayed in here, I think, is a very faithful recreation, leading us into the director's chair with Ridley Scott, who is well regarded in Hollywood from Alien to the original Gladiator, and in some recent years, The Martian. Oh, and I just remembered he did Black Hawk Down and Blade Runner. But he's been in somewhat of a slump for the last decade or so. It's never really a guarantee that the movie he puts out is going to be good. Case in point, the Exodus Gods and Kings. That was just... ugh, no. In terms of his quality, I would say this is one of the better directed films in his wheelhouse, but still, I think there could have been a little bit more energy that he could have put in there. Obviously, he's getting up there in age. Maybe it's time for him to retire. There's no harm in that. He's had a great career. At some point, you gotta recognize that maybe he can't really do certain things anymore, but that's his decision, it's not ours. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say about Gladiator 2. I would say that it's a fine movie that has its moments, and if you're into the Gladiator stuff, this is the movie for you. But if you're a fan of the original and you're really having high hopes for this one, you're not going to like what's presented in here. But even for someone like me, who doesn't have a strong attachment to the original film, I recognize that it probably could have slowed down and allowed certain elements to breathe a little bit. Don't go in expecting what you saw over 20 years ago. Just go in and watch the movie on its own terms. Those are my thoughts on Gladiator 2. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie if you've seen it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.